Welcome to the Athletic FC podcast with me, Ayo Akinwolere. Last week, Premier League clubs voted in favour of amendments to the associated party transaction rules. After labelling the rules discriminatory and distortive back in June, Manchester City were one of the 4 clubs to vote against the adjustments. So what exactly has changed and which clubs will benefit? Joining us today, as ever, for these kind of conversations, we have Matt Slater and also Jacob Whitehead is with us as well. Jacob, let's start with you. What exactly changed at the Premier League meeting last Friday? Bring us up to speed.
Hello. So basically, the Premier League forced through a big vote, which everyone knew was coming, and there's dispute about whether they could even bring the vote in the first place, as well as whether it would pass. So they basically wanted to ask clubs whether they would accept the Premier League's new associated party transaction rules. So if we go back, this all came out of the arbitration which City brought against the Premier League back in the summer. I think us three were all sat here last month talking about the upshot of that. And the tribunal's ruling was that part of the Premier League's rules were seen as anti-competitive and therefore unenforceable. Now, part of the issue is just how much of that was found unlawful and uncompetitive. We'll come on to that. Broadly, City wanted to wait for this vote because they think the tribunal is still clarifying some finer details, and the Premier League were like, no, we just want to bring it now. So we're expecting a debate throughout the day, but actually the Premier League seemed as if they were really confident that they had the numbers, so they needed 14 votes, 2/3 majority, and about 9:20 a.m, 20 minutes after it all started, Premier League dropped a message saying, we've got our way, these APT rules have been accepted. Broadly, there's 3 areas which are remedied. The first 2 are more procedural, but the really interesting one is shareholder loans, which are given by owners to their club as a source of funding, often interest-free, but not always. And those are now going to be accounted for under PSR calculations. You could argue it's another hoop for clubs to jump through, but you could also argue, as the tribunal found, that this had given some of City's rivals a financial advantage, and that loophole has now been closed.
Yeah, Jacob talks about shareholder loans, Matt, and I guess it is exactly what it says on the tin. But how many Premier League clubs have used shareholder loans to get to where they are right now?
That's a good question. So of the current 20, I think 14, so 2/3 have got some shareholder loans. Man City made a big deal of this in their main APT case. I think they pointed out that the Premier League clubs in total have borrowed from all sources about 4 billion, but 1.5 billion, so well over a third, is in these low to no interest, these cosy, friendly shareholder loans. And if you actually look at those 14, the top 3 account for about 1 billion of it. So that is in order: Everton, Brighton and Arsenal. We've talked about Everton so many times on this pod, and here they are at number 1 on the shareholder loan pot parade. They're at about 450 million that they've borrowed on these very friendly terms from Fayed Mashuri since 2016. You then got Brighton at 370ish. I think it might be a tiny bit more, from Tony Bloom, who again, big benefactor type owner, has just lent the money on these very, very sort of friendly terms. Arsenal have borrowed, I think, more than 250 million. So those 3 are sort of kind of by some margin the biggest beneficiaries of this type of loan. And then I think there's a group of clubs who are all at just north of 100 million. So there's quite a gap between Arsenal in 3rd and Chelsea, I think it is, in 4th. So you've got Chelsea, Liverpool, Leicester, I believe it's Bournemouth, all north of 100. And then there's sort of another, the rest of them at less than 100, all the way down to, I think, Villa actually are at 14th. I think they've borrowed about 10 million in this way. And Forest, who I know we're going to get into the people who supported Manchester City and Newcastle United, not surprisingly, in their opposition to this vote, Forest and Villa voted with them. Forest have got shareholder loans of about £61 million. So that's kind of interesting. But look, the ones that have borrowed the most are clubs that we've talked about quite a bit. Everton most notably, and then Brighton and Arsenal.
What are the benefits then of shareholder loans? From what I'm sort of understanding from afar, is it just about a quick injection of cash for transfers, for stadium builds or whatever? I mean, what are they often used for, and why are they used?
Jacob, do you want to do that? Or should, I mean, there's.
No, you go for it, Matt. You go for it, Matt. Jacob, follow on if you want.
Okay. Well, look, I mean, so the benefits for the club. I mean, look, it's money, right? So, I suppose the better question might be, what are the benefits for the owner? Why do you do it this way? Well, I think in your question is one key reason. It is quicker and easier than issuing shares. Not hugely so, but it is a bit quicker. I think the next reasons are probably the real reason why certain owners like it this way. One, it's a little bit easier to get your money back if it's a loan, if it's a debt, when you come to sell the club, than if it's just money you just pumped in as shares. That's gone. I mean, you negotiate that in the price. I'm selling you this business. I think it's worth this much money, and you can have a row about that. It's you kind of need to create a bit of an auction, don't you, to get what you think is value in terms of the amount of money you've put into this business. It's a bit like trying to sell your house, right? Well, I've done the garden, I've done the kitchen, I've done the bathrooms. That's equity that I've put into this business, and I would like that reflected in the price you're offering me for it. However, if there's a sort of debt there, an actual debt, you can sort of see, well, there's a debt sitting there. There's no arguing about that. Are you going to pay me back? So I think there's a sort of easy to get money on the way out reason that you might do this. And then the other one, and so many of the answers in business are about tax, sort of tax management. It's a more efficient way. Like you can deduct tax from the interest that your businesses pay, your football clubs pay, but you don't deduct tax from equity injections. So it's a combination of, it's tax efficient, it's a little bit easier for the owner to get their money on the way out, and it's a slightly quicker way to pump money into your business.
The one is Manchester City, really, Jacob. Really, what was their objection? Why did Manchester City raise the APT rules as an issue in the hearing versus the Premier League?
So it's worth thinking about why they had that hearing at all. Effectively, the APT rules, or the shareholder loans rule, is almost an ancillary thing. They wanted to show more broadly that they've been mistreated by the Premier League, by the APT rules. And as part of that, they threw absolutely tons at the Premier League. They sort of said that they'd been mistreated as a golf club. They said that they'd taken too much time. And one of it, part of this was that they wanted to say, look, here's one benefit that our rivals have. That's not fair. They can have these shareholder loans. We can't, or we don't have that. And the Premier League rejected a lot of the arguments which City made, but this was one which stuck. And so then it's obviously the obvious point is why, if they want shareholder loans to be included in PSR, did they vote against them at this Premier League meeting? And this all comes down to sort of a legal interpretation. So the Premier League had this rule. The Premier League's view was that the parts of their own rules which could be found unlawful could effectively be quickly corrected. There's this legal principle called the blue pencil test, which says you can just cross out the specific clauses which aren't correct and just write in new ones. However, City say, hang on, if parts of it are unlawful, that effectively means the whole thing's unlawful. You need to write your entire set of rules. And both parties disagree about this, and they've actually sent this dispute back to the tribunal to rule on, and that's going to come, I think it'll probably be in about 4 or 5 weeks' time now. And City made the point of, hang on, let's not do this now. Let's wait until we have some sort of clarity, and other teams agreed with them. And Aston Villa spoke about this publicly through their owner. But ultimately, the Premier League forced it through. But we're in a situation now where if that tribunal come back with a different decision, it's a very awkward spot for the Premier League because they'll have to alter rules which have already been altered.
Well, Newcastle United, so, unsurprisingly, because if we sort of turn the clock back to where we started with this whole debate, these rules were brought in because of Newcastle United. So go back to December 2021, so a month or so after the Saudi Arabia takeover of Newcastle United. Effectively, the rest of the league went, oh no, not another one. It was that cynical. It was. We've been through this with Man City. We didn't really kind of grasp that until it was too late. I'm now putting myself in the shoes of other clubs here. They're sometimes known as the Red Cartel. I don't think they all wear red, by the way. This is really the rest of the league, and they just said no, we're not. We can't have this. And it was so. I think we've learned so much around state-backed, state-sponsored clubs in the intervening period that the prospect of a very ambitious aggressive, in a hurry sovereign wealth fund like PIF, like Public Investment Fund, it really was, right, we've got to do something. So they brought in these APT rules, which were a strengthening of rules that were already in the old PSR regime, but just everything beefed up, right? We are really going to get on top of this idea of, cozy, friendly sponsorship deals. And look, UEFA have already got there. UEFA have been looking at this stuff more forensically than the Premier League for a while. But I think it was just a sort of sense of the Premier League, well, we've really, wake up, right? Wake up. And Newcastle obviously knew they spotted this as all about them and have opposed it from day one. Man City clearly realised, oh right, okay, this is all a bit retrospective. They're after us too, and UAE and Saudi Arabia are kind of pretty friendly back at home, back in the Gulf. So there was a sort of natural alliance between the two. Man City constantly pushing, trying to get through an even bigger Etihad deal. These are all things that came out in the tribunal. So natural allies on this point. What was interesting, and I think this is where we get to the real kind of shifting sands, no pun intended, of Premier League politicking, and it's just how fluid sometimes they can be. So sometimes you can sort of see this group of, just for want of a better term, these disruptor clubs, the clubs that are trying to break into the big six. They might have an owner who's willing to spend, and they do want to shake things up, and they do, I think, correctly see that financial fair play, PSR, whatever you want to call it, does have a braking effect, does have a kind of status quo preserving effect. So what do we do about that? So we've got to kind of push everything. And then you'll sort of see clubs who are just annoyed with the Premier League. And I think we've seen some of that in recent votes. And Everton, Forest, Leicester, clubs that have found themselves in PSR trouble or found themselves close to PSR trouble. Villa would be one there. Villa tried to get the ceiling raised in a vote a couple of votes ago and didn't get it done. They were saying, well, we know that you can lose 105 million over 3 years. That's ridiculous. It hasn't changed because of inflation. It should be at least 135. They didn't get that through. So we've sort of seen signs that Villa were pushing up against, and I think that's one of the big takeaways from this most recent sort of bout of lawfare in the Premier League. Aston Villa, if you were sleeping on Aston Villa before, wake up, right? They not only are they a decent team on the pitch, we can all see what's going on the pitch, the Champions League and what have you, and how they played last year, and their ambitions, the ambitions of their ownership. They see themselves as the next. Leicester were there for a bit. Are Brighton big enough? Or West Ham? We've had debates about who number 7 was. Everton clearly thought they were. A decade ago. That's what Mashiri's big spending was all about. It's Villa, right? Villa are determined to smash through. Their owners, Wes Edens and Nassef Swahiris, are very, very rich. Both of them multi-billionaires in their own right. They see themselves as, look, this is a club with a fan base, with a history, with a brand that can hang with that crowd. We're in a hurry. So, I think Villa's a really interesting story at the moment for me, on and off the pitch. And I think then we get into, and this is football's fatal flaw for me, just its self-interest. Villa made some reasonable points in their open letter. And it's really interesting, they went public, right? They did it through the Telegraph. They're basically an open letter. Let's wait. And for the reasons that Jacob was talking about, the Premier League has already asked the tribunal to clarify. There was it was a long old report. I can't remember if it was 60 pages, 70 pages. I've read so many of these, I forget. But you did come away with it going, well, there's a lot of detail in there, but you have left some stuff unanswered. So both parties, City and Premier League, immediately claiming victory. So there's doubt, there's confusion there. Go back to the tribunal and say, can you clear some of this stuff up? So you've got to wait for that to happen. Villa were sort of effectively saying, well, why rush? We've already asked them that question. They're coming back in January, we hope. Maybe we'll get some clarity then. We're already spending a fortune on, legal bills already. I think the last year's Premier League legal bill was 5 times what was budgeted for. That's all coming off the bottom line for us, by the way. So it's almost Villa saying to the rest of them, why are we doing this? Should we just wait? Is it so bad that we wait? Man City have already told us, they've written to us about 5 times, they're going to sue, they're going to keep going. What are we doing? So I thought that was in some ways quite reasonable. However, right, the rest of the league are like, hold on a minute, you're like the next cab off the rank in terms of breaking in. There's more going on here than you're just saying being sensible, like being the grown up in the room here. And two, we know Nassif Sahiris has just moved his base of his business to Abu Dhabi. We know that UAE, the Sovereign Wealth Fund, is investing in Wes Eden's private equity fund, Fortress. This is, and then the rest of the league are just like, well, you're not being honest actors here. You are driven by self-interest too, and it all then breaks down into, the usual factions. So that is why these votes are fascinating. That's why they shift. That's why they change, and that's why people jump sides. It seems like Everton and Wolves sort of join the fold again. Everton, of course, is going to be about to be bought by Americans. Maybe they sort of see things differently. They sort of see things, So there's all sorts of things going on, and I just find these votes fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, one of the good things, I think Matt and I have both been to them in person, lurking around like bad smells outside the room to try and chat to people after, and they really are amazing just as a sort of people watching exercise. Obviously, you can read in too much as to sort of who stormed out looking angry, who's chatting to who, but the fact is this is in-person politicking. Often the execs are down the night before having meetings. They might have dinner. They might have stuff going on. Just to kind of take you, to just outside the room, more accurately, is they're always in a nice hotel in West London, usually around Marble Arch. It's, £5 for a flat white from my experience.
There's one for you, that's it.
Yeah. No, it's on expenses, luckily. Clubs usually send 2 or 3 representatives, and even just who clubs send is really interesting because it's sort of a sign of who's really making the decisions. Like Man U, I think last season sort of sent different people every week. It's kind of quite similar to what it was on the pitch in terms of their lineups. And you can just lead to this quite interesting stuff, kind of details emerge. So, for example, at this meeting, Omar Barada, who's just joined Manchester United from Manchester City, found himself sat next to Simon Cliff, City's league counsel, who former colleagues, but now very much on opposite sides of a divide, both in sort of sporting sense and in sort of this debate. So you just kind of lead to these really interesting, fun situations, or fun at least for us to discuss.
Yeah, just to pick up on sometimes it is personality led, right? So the Cliff Barada thing's really interesting, right? So Simon Cliff has actually played a bit of a role, a bigger role than perhaps he intended in this most recent vote. Cliff he's the guy that sent a series of letters. There's been a real ding-dong kind of correspondence war between City and the league as to the interpretation of that tribunal hearing. Cliff is the guy that sent that very aggressive letter almost to all the other clubs saying the Premier League's lying. If you want any legal advice, come to us because we'll tell you the truth, not that lot. That annoyed some clubs. I know it did because I spoke to them about it. They were like, oh God, turn it in, we've got lawyers too, you don't stop lecturing us. That didn't go that well. Cliff is a combative guy. I know people that have worked with him at City. He's the sort of guy, he's kind of like that sort of terrier in midfield. You love him when he's on your team. When you sort of leave, he's like the guy you'd want to boo, the away fans that would want to boo. He's a sort of Robbie Savage type figure. He appears in he'll appear in the 115/130 case. He's the author of some of the more notable emails. Save that one for another pod. So he's an interesting guy, but this sort of personality thing is really interesting. So the Man United Man City dynamic is intriguing because at the moment they've sort of split again. Man United going one way, Man City going this way. When we come back to the debate of anchoring, do you remember that one, which is basically a wage cap? It's a pretty hard wage cap actually. Man United agree with Man City on that one. So in a couple of shareholders meetings, when that one comes back up, it's working in shadow at the moment this season. Man United are like, no. Premier League, you're wrong on that one. That is you're restraining our ability to spend how much we want to spend on players. We're going to vote with Man City on that one. So these things can change.
Yeah, I'm so fascinated, Jacob. Then, because we've spoken about clubs that have used these shareholder loans. I'm interested by the clubs that don't seem to own their owners any money. Manchester United in the list that we've put up. 0 debt to their owners. How have Manchester United been able to do this? And Matt, please weigh in on this because I know we've all been watching. Manchester United have spent quite a lot of money over the last few years on a lot of players.
Yeah, so we're one of 6 clubs which haven't. So just run through that list of 6. We've got Southampton, we've got Manchester United, we've got Manchester City, Newcastle, Tottenham and West Ham. What's interesting about Manchester United is they've just got a totally different ownership structure, what we've done historically, to the rest of the league. They just don't really have a need to because of the structuring of it. I mean, Matt will be able to describe this in far more detail, but it's sort of, it's quite entertaining. As much flack as the Glazers have justifiably got, this is now something where they might actually be able to say, I mean, it's in Manchester United's case, it'd probably only be a matter of a few million, but it's something where they have actually slightly emerged on the better side of it.
Well, the thing about United is they are pretty much the exception to most rules. So, you know, I've been jumping around the timeline a bit. So go right back to financial fair play, if you like. So that's we've had that for about, for more than a decade. United was so far in front in terms of being a cash-generating business that they don't need shareholder loans. And the way the Glazers chose Man United for a reason. They were the biggest club at the time. They were vulnerable because they'd been listed. So you could do it. You could do a sort of a hostile takeover there, which is basically what it was. And it was a leveraged buyout, which is very aggressive private equity move. And right from the off, the Glazers have set their stall out. United, we just see you as this business, this cash-generating business. You could be a supermarket chain, you could be a drugs company, whatever, right? You generate a lot of cash. We've borrowed a load of money to buy you, and we're then going to put that debt on the business, and we're just going to go back to Florida and count our money. And that's what they've done. They've put nothing in. Nothing for 20-odd years. So no shareholder loans, no cash injections. The money that has come into United is money they've generated themselves just by being, at the time, the biggest club. If you looked at all the Deloitte rankings from way back when, they've never really left the top 5. Most of the time they were in the top 3. They sort of swapped positions with Barca or Real. They've a huge advantage that has been slowly eroded away as Man City have come up and Liverpool have caught them and Bayern at times have. But United were. The story of the last 20 odd years is United sort of the rest of the field kind of catching United and United sort of drifting a tiny bit. But United are never not going to be a big football club. They are a big football club. And the Glazers have just taken advantage of that. So they haven't put any of their own money in. Low interest, no interest, whatever. They then, partially listed them on the New York Stock Exchange. That again was about getting more money into the Glazers' pockets, paying down some of the debt, some of the takeover debt. They've issued some bonds. And then, of course, the most recent thing is Radcliffe, who actually has put money in. So that is, if you like, a new phase in this sort of Man United ownership story, where someone has come along, an old fan, very rich old fan, is going to sort of try and do it in a more sort of traditional benefactor kind of way. He's a lot of that money, unfortunately, has flowed to the Glazers, but he has signalled that I am going to put money into this club. And he's done it as equity at the moment. He hasn't done it as a low interest shareholder loan. So you're right, they haven't taken any shareholder loans, but it really is more to do with the fact that they were so wealthy and could run as a proper business, unlike most clubs. And the Glazers have just sat there and just collected the money.
Oh, I love that. I mean, not for Man United fans, but just interesting insight, Matt. Just interesting insight. Now, Jacob, does the result of the APT changes still have relevance then to clubs like Southampton, Manchester United, Newcastle, Tottenham, West Ham, who have no shareholder loans?
Yeah, I mean, effectively, it does give them a small leg up in the eventual PSR reckoning, because teams will now have to take those shareholder loans into account. For some of them, they may have to pay far more. For example, if it's an interest-free loan, you'll effectively have to make a bigger correction in PSR than if it is one which does have some interest in. So there will be different amounts, but these clubs will have an improvement of a few million, but that can be significant. These aren't massive margins we're talking about, especially sort of towards the bottom of the Premier League. Everton went over by sort of not tons and tons, a few million, and there's other teams who are right on the line, and those 3 or 4 million can make a big difference. I think the important thing is here, and why lots of teams didn't want to wait for the tribunal, is that having the decision now means that they effectively know what the target is. They can get their own house in order. They can be like, we need to sell this right winger. We aren't going to give this player a new contract, and effectively sort stuff ahead of time. They'd rather go for the devil they do know from the detail they don't.
No, I was just going to say, Jacob's absolutely right. We've talked a lot about why the 4 did what they did. Let's think about some of the 16, right? It's certainty. They agreed with the Premier League. The Premier League was in a bit of a tough spot, right? They had a tribunal ruling that, depending on who you believed, either said their rule book was illegal or said big chunks of it were illegal. Well, that's hard. So they've gone, do you know what? We can blue pencil this. We can quickly tweak this. And there was some genuine legal debate. That's what lawyers are for, right? They argue. No, you'll be okay. You'll be okay. Fix your rules. The tribunal, if you read it, there's stuff that they really, really didn't like. We've talked a lot about it. The shareholder loan issue that was a real problem. And the Premier League, I think, has always had that in the back of their head that was a vulnerability in their rules. It was an inconsistency. So you could argue, right, you got found out on that one, and you good. The other stuff was all a bit procedural, and I think that was the blue pencil-y bits. You can sort of fix that, and we'll see what the tribunal come back with. So I think certainty is a really big part of this. But we've spent a lot of time talking about shareholder loans. Let's think about the bigger thing, which is associated party transactions. So we've been in limbo on that as well. So I think there are reasons why, like for City, it wasn't all just about resolving this argument on shareholder loans and, if you like, weakening their rivals. They're desperate to get through a couple of stalled sponsorship deals. Their Etihad renewal is the big one. There's this First Abu Dhabi Bank transaction they might like to bring back. I think if you look at both Villa and Forest, it's not a coincidence, it's not an accident to me that both of them are part of multi-club groups. Multi-club deals are associated party transactions. So that's interesting. And I think in the past, when I've talked to clubs about their views on associated party transaction rules, the multi-club issues come up. So I think Crystal Palace had a bit of an internal debate about, should we be making that easier or harder for clubs to sort of, trade and move assets around, player assets. And then I think there's always an assumption that those friendly sponsorship deals, the kind of, is that a bit dodgy, can only be Gulf states, right? Can only be sovereign wealth fund type stuff, right? Because they're the only people that would have that kind of sway over an airline, and I can understand why people might think that. But big business is complicated, and we're talking about private equity wealth now for a lot of these clubs. We're talking about multi-billionaires and syndicates of billionaires. So there are, I think, other challenges and risks around sponsorships, without sort of naming names, because I genuinely don't have the detail of the facts. But an example might be, I'll give you one. I'm not saying this is necessarily an issue, but Swahiris is on the board of Adidas. He's a big investor in Adidas. Now, let's say Villa were to come with an Adidas deal, that would have to be discussed. I don't think he has a big enough shareholding for it to be a massive issue, but it would certainly be a discussion. And he's not alone. There are other, as I say, these big private equity firms would have shareholdings in potential sponsors. And it's not just, one, if you like, Gulf Prince phoning up another Gulf Prince and saying, can we get our airline to go on the foot? It's more complicated than that. So this issue of associated party transactions and how you police them, how you assess them, isn't going away. And that is, I think, one of the reasons why the Premier League needed to get its rule book back.
Yeah, interesting. Jacob, when does all these changes, when do they all take effect? But also, I think you alluded to it, and I think Matt sort of touched on it a little bit, is that, will there be any retrospective assessments on any of the shareholder loans already in place? We look at Everton at the top of that list, for instance. Could now the Premier League go back and go, hold on a second, we've already got you nailed on a few charges. There might be a few more, actually, based on what we're looking at.
I'm an Everton supporter, and you really just know how to keep the good news. Keep the good news coming for me. Where to start? Yes, so broadly there will be a degree of retrospective examination. So the way the PSR works, it's looked at in 3-year cycles. So if we go back to 3 years ago, December 2024. Basically, any shareholder loans which were made since then will be investigated. Clubs will have to submit that to the board, and there'll be an assessment as to basically how much of a benefit that has given them, and then that will be reaccounted for in the upcoming accounts which we have to submit and comply to. So, Everton have been up against it in recent seasons. They've already had their hands slapped for dipping too deep into the honeypot. And look, it's again going to be a bit of a struggle to meet it, but clearly they've looked at it, they're confident. They say, right, we have, I think it's about 350 million of shareholder loans over a long period, but most of these are all interest-free. So it is something they'll have to account for. And last year, I think they were over by, it's about 15, 16 million. And it is a number which will be multiple millions, which will be accounted for. However, they've not had a massive expenditure this year. And there's also a sort of double jeopardy point of they've already been stung for a couple of overlapping years. Are the Premier League really going to come back and fine them for 3 years in a row? They think it's quite unlikely, especially with these late allowances, and their confidence they will be under it in general. So it's something they're going to have to be aware of. But if they really, really thought it was a problem, and we've gone to the point of self-interest, they probably would have voted on City's side if they really, really thought they're going to get nailed significantly.
Yeah, does that work for the same of the Brightons, Matt, and Arsenals of this world as well?
Yes and no. I mean, I completely agree with Jacob that I think there's a big clue as to Everton's position on this. They voted in favour, right? So they've done the numbers. I'd be amazed if they've got the numbers wrong again.
I would.
Never know.
Could you imagine? Could you imagine?
Yeah. Well, God, yeah.
Have you seen some of the signings we've got the numbers wrong on? We paid 30 million for Cenk Tosun.
Oh dear. This should be easier than that. This should be easier than assessing a striker. This really is adding up. But all right, let's just assume that they haven't. I think there's a clue there. The fact that Wolves, another club that have been discussed, have been really, really close in the last season or two, back this. They've had a look and thought, you know what? Even if they have to add some interest, add some cost on the PSR, that side of the equation will be okay. Yeah, Brighton and Arsenal, I think, are slightly different, right? First of all, I don't think either are close or have been close to failing PSR. I just don't think they have. I don't think Brighton have been anywhere near. Arsenal may well have been a little bit restrained at times because they were towards the top end, because they've been spending quite a bit of money in the last couple of seasons. But I don't think there's any issue here of oh my word, there's a cost that we didn't see. I think they're gonna be okay. And then the other thing about both of those clubs, and this was clever, but it's also legally sound. You can't just change the rules like that. Like boom, this thing that you thought was okay is now not okay. That's just a basic sort of principle of law. That's not fair. So they've all got 50 days. They've all got till I think January the 11th to convert all their loans or some of their loans to equity. And I think what we will see is quite a few of those clubs do that. Anyone that is close will do that, particularly someone like Brighton or Arsenal, really, because they're both owned by very, very wealthy people. The Cronkies are ludicrously wealthy. They will have done this for their own reasons. They will have done this, I think, for sort of tax management type reasons. They'll tweak it. They'll tweak it. And the other thing about the Arsenal loans is, again, it's another one of those assumptions. Everyone assumes because Everton's were interest-free, they're all interest-free. They're not. I think Arsenal's were low interest. I don't think they've revealed the rate, but I think there's a sort of suggestion, there's a sort of theory in the game that they're paying 2%, way below market rates. So there'll be a fair market value assessment if they choose not to convert to equity. But I don't think Arsenal are any difficulty. And Tony Bloom, his generosity towards his club, is there for all to see. I think he'll go, oh right, okay, so I've got to tweak that. Oh, I'll tweak that. But he'll only do it, I suppose, if he thinks he has to, because they're up against a PSR type issue, and I don't think they are. So yeah, we're going to get some more clues as to where clubs are at in the next month or so by seeing who issues new shares.
Well, I guess as we're sort of coming to a close, I'm interested in Manchester City. Look, 115 charges yet again is a big conversation, Matt, and that's still ongoing. Can we just remind listeners and when it's expected to conclude and when that outcome will be announced as well?
Well, I think the hearings, they've done such an amazing job of just keeping a lid on that. So we were expecting a sort of 10-week hearing, which gets it to about sort of now-ish. I've heard people sort of tell me it finished last week, finishes this week, finishes next week. No one really knows. I mean, it really is incredible. I didn't think the parties as such would blab, but they've had so many expert witnesses. I thought something would get out, that someone would tell someone that I appeared as an expert witness, and we'd hear a little bit, we'd get a glimpse. Nothing. I mean, it was just really, in terms of they've all obviously had it drilled into them. Keep stum, this is serious stuff, reputations, fortunes, the lot are at stake here, don't say a word. So the hearing, let's say, is finishing. Then we all thought, and we can see with all of previous rulings, be it EFL rulings, be it you name it, the panel then has to go away and make a decision, but most importantly, explain it. These rulings are so important, and you have to get the detail right, you have to write them right, because they know they're going to be appealed. They just know it. So they are not easy to do. It's not like, me or Jacob knocking out 1,000 words on what just happened. These are like dissertations. So it's a piece of work, right? So I think that's going to get us to, again, most people's estimations at the start of the process, end of Jan, probably Feb. I think probably February. Okay, so then it lands. Me, Jacob, and whoever else puts their hands up will probably divvy it up into 50 pages each, and because I think this is going to be 200-300 pages, and there'll be an appeal. The loser will appeal, which gets us, I think, to the summer, and then who knows, right? Will we have some certainty by the beginning of next season? I don't know.
Yeah, and Jacob as well. We're talking about shareholder loans. Anything else you see Premier League clubs might be battling over as we move on? Different people have different stakes in the Premier League, different ambitions, and where they want to take their clubs.
To be honest, I really want to talk about the Premier League themselves, because they're going to be actually really nervous, because they had reason to bring this quickly and try and get it solved, because obviously previously to introducing the APT rules, which are illegal, they clearly weren't happy with the existing rules. They brought this in for a reason. For the Newcastle one, they're feeling a bit vulnerable. But even more so, they're taking a risk here by going early before the findings of a tribunal with their vote. As it's gone so far, they actually look quite strong, which they haven't necessarily looked the whole way through the process. But they have fixed it quickly. They did it within the first 20 minutes of the day, which is all optics in a way, but it does make them look strong. And you've got to remember that they are trying to prove at the moment for the regular that they can govern their own affairs. But let's just think about what happens if in a few weeks' time the tribunal come back and they say, actually, you can't take this blue pencil approach. Everything has to change. They're going to look absolutely awful. They will have shunned everyone into a vote and failed. It would have effectively been on their way of trying to make it lawful will be unlawful in itself. It's like doing an operation and leaving the scissors inside the stitching. So there's going to be nerves based at the Paddington HQ.
Yeah. Just to add on that, I mean, I think there's one thing that perhaps we haven't said that we perhaps should explain. What really did the Premier League change? We've talked an awful lot about shareholder loans. So really, what they've done, if you actually look at it, is there's a step in the process that we missed. In February of this year, I explained how in December 21 they all collectively lost their minds and went, oh, here comes Newcastle, and tightened things up really fast. Too fast, as the tribunal pointed out. You need to do a bit more thinking on this, shareholder loans in particular. In February of this year, they tightened it again. Now, I think this, again, it depends on, so much of this is to do with like your position that isn't really shifting, a bit like the vote in the US, right? There's no swing, there's hardly any swing voters here. How you feel about Man City. So there's a school of thought that Man City only started this most recent fight because of the February 2024 changes, where they tightened up the new December 2021 rules even more. Now, some of this is really kind of a bit too detailed. They changed the language. They changed some of the onus on whose responsibility it is to prove that your sponsorship deal is at fair market value. What what we've got in effect is those February amendments have gone. The Premier League blue penciled it by going, do you know what? We went too far in February. And that vote was very, very contentious. It was a 12-6 vote, so only just 2/3 with 2 abstentions. It was the tightest vote in Premier League history. So that, I think, was a clue to the Premier League. That wasn't a great set of amendments. You know, the tribunal didn't like them. Again, it's, I don't want to get too technical with the language, but it was a tightening too far. So we've gone back to December 21st, and we shall see what the tribunal says. And Jacob's already explained, have they gone too fast? We shall see, right? I can understand the Premier League's position. I can understand the Villa position. You know, why rush? I can see that. In terms of what else the Premier League have got going on, and Jacob does make this really good point that a win's a win, right? It's been tough for the Premier League. They've been under siege. They've upset certain clubs. They've upset fan bases. You know, they've been trying to apply their rule book, and they found it difficult. So they've got a win here. They got a 16-4 vote, and it was a quick vote. And people, me included, did wonder if they'd bother with this vote. I thought they might postpone it because I thought they couldn't afford another loss. So, well, you know, they've stayed the course, right? But for years and years and years, and I'm going back to the previous regime under Scudamore, it was unanimous vote after unanimous vote after unanimous vote. Those days have gone. The consensus that ruled the Premier League from about the mid-90s till about the mid-10s has gone. That kind of big six versus the rest, the rise of Chelsea, then the rise of Man City, has just fractured that consensus. And I think it's genuinely gone. That kind of collegiate thinking. You can tell in their press releases, they'll say unanimous. If it's not unanimous, they'll just say it's gone through. We very rarely see unanimous. Unanimous for the most simple things, right? Yeah. New TV deal. Yeah, okay. Whatever, right? New health protocol or something to do with refereeing. The big money stuff, very rarely unanimous anymore. So that is an issue for the Premier League. That's not gone away. And I've already mentioned some rows that are just simmering. So I've talked about anchoring, which is a genuine attempt to think about competitive balance, to rein in the top clubs. That's a row that's going to come back. Jacob mentioned the regulator. The Premier League have got that wrong. They've just got that wrong from the beginning. The EFL have run rings around them. They've upset their own clubs. They just still haven't got their heads around how to deal with the regulator. So that's an issue they've still got to face. The New Deal, which is connected to the regulator issue, this money, this new financial distribution for the rest of the game. So there's a load of stuff still to come, and of course the 115, 130 case, which just dwarfs this skirmish around APT. So there's a load of stuff.
Yeah,
but they got a win. So that's you know. Yeah, I don't think it was triples all round champagne. I think it was probably a relief. Yeah, we finally won one, right? But on to the next one.
Well, that's the thing. Well, there's a load of stuff to come, and don't rest assured we'll be here with you two back on another podcast before the season is out, gentlemen. I really appreciate your time, Matt, Jacob. Thanks for joining us, and we'll be back tomorrow for more. If you want to watch more episodes of the show, please subscribe to the channel. We'll be joined by the likes of David Ornstein, Matt Slater, Adam Crafton, Carl Anker, and plenty more through the season. If you'd like to listen to the episodes in full in audio form, search The Athletic FC wherever you get your podcasts from.